Survival horror. I love a good survival horror in all its forms and flavours. Back in the 90s, 3D graphics were on the rise and horror games such as Alone in the Dark took advantage of this fancy new technology, but not without its compromises. You had very basic and, let's face it, ugly 3D character models. But what about 3D environments too? Nope, not yet. Alone in the Dark set the template for not just survival horrors, but of how early 3D games handled their environments without them being as butt-ugly as characters that looked like origami attempted by a blind giraffe. Backgrounds were created in far superior computers, made into 2D images whose perspective matched the 3D camera angles. Later in the mid to late 90s, when 3D was still kinda going through an awkward phase, a little game was released for the brand spanking new Sony PlayStation, Resident Evil. A series that didn't really start to gain popularity until the release of its sequel. Resident Evil pretty much became the new format standard for many survival horrors to come. Bad things happen, professionals sent in, horrors emerge, deep mystery uncovered, kill it with fire because man done fucked up. Is today's game Cold Fear any different? Well, let's see. Developed by Darkworks and published by back when they weren't shit Ubisoft, Cold Fear was Darkworks' second horror game after, appropriately enough, Alone in the Dark and The New Nightmare. But this was Ubisoft's first venture into the genre, but unfortunately its popularity was doomed from the outset because only 2 months prior to its scheduled release, Capcom be all like, Resident Evil 4, bitches! Which is part of the risk you run when you introduce a new IP. The Eastern Spirit. A Russian whaling ship is left floating in the Bering Sea. The initial investigation team finds no crew, but are greeted by something else. Well, if a group of what I'm guessing are Navy SEALs can't deal with this mysterious threat, what's their backup plan? Coast Guard. Not that the USCG are not equipped to deal with danger in times of desperation, but go with what's available, I suppose. You play as Tom Hansen, whose hair gently blows in the wind despite the pouring rain because physics.
Okay, people, you know your assignments. Hansen.
It's up to Tom and the others.
What's that? Open fire! Open fire! Holy shit! Ah!
It's up to Tom to investigate the Eastern Spirit and find out what caused it to become radio silent. The first noticeable thing are the excellent weather effects. The violent sea rocking the ship being whipped up by the storm, along with the wind, and the rain falling onto the camera certainly sets the tone. Like most games of this ilk, uncovering the plot is slowly done through exploration, discovering clues, and of course finding diary entries and memos etc., inexplicably scattered all over the place. As soon as an unexplained incident occurs, everybody's personal documents are suddenly spread around by the Easter Bunny's asshole brother.
Hey! Осторожно! Один из них за углом!
Some crew members are still around, frightened and shooting at everything. Others are not so standoff. Oh shit, what is that? Well, now we know what happened to the Navy SEALs. You can choose between standard third person or over-the-shoulder camera views, though I find the former is best suited for general moving around and the latter for combat. This game has a little but very useful feature that I think many others should adopt. Key items typically twinkle to make sure you don't miss them, but usual stuff like ammo and health do not. So instead of searching a room, and we've all done it, by rubbing up along the scenery and tapping the action button to find any possible items, Cold Fear has an interaction indicator which becomes active when Tom is near a usable object. This is good! Do more of that! Further investigation reveals that the crew have been infected with parasitic creatures called exocells. The Eastern Spirit is, or was, carrying passengers from the military-staffed Star of Sakhalin oil rig, whose drilling uncovered the exocells. Because of the exocell's unique biological characteristics, a scientist, Dr. Victor Kamsky, is brought in to conduct experimentations. This, of course, results in the... Hang on. Why does the ship rock about when you're on deck but is stationary when you're inside? Okay, I'm joking a bit here, and that would be distracting to have that all the time, but maybe this is a super modern whaling ship that has a separate interior suspended by a gyroscopic stabilizer. Where was I? The experiments result in the age-old conflict of science wanting to use the discovery for good, but the military wanted to create a weapon, so your main goal overall is to find and rescue Dr. Kamsky from the mercenaries. Due to the finite size of the Eastern Star, the whole game doesn't take place there. The latter half is aboard the oil rig where the research is taking place. To its detriment, one survival horror trait this doesn't follow is the lack of a map. The ship does have one in the manual, but it's rather basic with barely any labelling. A live map tends to update indicating whether any doorways are accessible or not.
This door ain't opening.
Ain't is bad grammar.
Get in there!
I never used it, it wasn't very useful. The oil rig? Not even that. I had to consult a walkthrough a few times to remind myself where certain locations were. While exploring these well-detailed locations, I might add, you encounter other exos of various annoyance. The exocells are the basic parasitic creatures that infect a host, but others using exocell DNA were created by Dr. Kamsky, displaying some very Lovecraftian deep-sea characteristics such as bioluminescence and camouflage, which you fight off with a pretty typical array of weaponry, with one extra step to take. When an exocell infects a human host, it takes control of the brain, so if the head isn't destroyed with gunfire, they will get back up again unless you kill the brain with a rather undignified head stomp. Speaking of the weapons, Cold Fear handles ammunition in an odd way that kept throwing me off guard. The way ammo is usually displayed is with two numbers, one showing the amount of ammo left in the magazine and the other showing the remaining supply. So if you have, say, 30 in the magazine and 70 remaining, you have 100 rounds, right? Not according to Cold Fear. The second number includes the rounds you have in the magazine. So if it says 70, you have 70. No, Cold Fear. Bad Cold Fear. I kept thinking I had more ammo than I did. I won't spoil the ending, but if you played any survival horror involving a scientist creating monstrosities, you know what to expect. Despite some interesting locations, effects, and a few unique touches here and there, Cold Fear doesn't really bring anything new to the table. Don't get me wrong, this is a perfectly good example of the genre, and it's a decent game, but it's just been done before. Even if this didn't have to compete with Resident Evil 4, I can't really imagine it would have fared any better. If you're hankering for some classic survival horror, I'd recommend this. It's not hard to come by as it's now available on Steam. Give it a shot. It won't wow you, but it's a fitting, albeit overlooked, entry among its horror brethren.